So our next speakers are Ishan Khare, who joins us from India. He's a software engineer at Loft Labs, and Mauricio Salatino joins us from the UK, staff engineer at VMware.
There you go. We ready?
Take it away.
Thanks. Let's do it. Okay, people is joining now. That's good. All right. So we will be talking a little bit about expanding interoperability in the CD ecosystem. That's a mouthful of things. And we will be showing a demo that it's pretty interesting. It's just combining a bunch of tools. And because it's pretty interesting, it's also pretty complicated. So we will take it slow. We will try to explain what we are trying to achieve, what we are doing, and then Ishan is going to show kind of like an amazing demo that he has built. So the agenda, it's pretty simple. We are going to talk about a use case that we have been using for building this demo, the challenges that we faced, why we are using CDEvents. We are going to show a demo, and also we are going to talk a little bit about the challenges and the next steps, kind of like in our opinions, or where should we be taking this, basically.
Hey, so my name is Ishan. I'm working currently at Loft Labs as a software engineer, mostly working on vCluster right now. And previously worked at Gojek with the platform team there. So yeah, that's mostly about me. Yeah,
he really likes building Kubernetes controllers. This is something that I found, by working with him. He really likes it. And we will be showing a couple of them. My name is Mauricio Salatino. I'm at Salaboy in Twitter. I'm writing a book that is called Continuous Delivery for Kubernetes. There is a discount code down there. If you are interested in it, feel free to check it out. If not, check my blog. It's salaboy.com. I'm a staff engineer at VMware. I'm building Knative, which is another open source project that we will be showing here. I'm working with the eventing side of things, which is how do we route cloud events in general, and how do you connect different systems using events. And I'm very passionate about functions as well, something that we will be showing maybe at the end if we have enough time. I've joined this kind of like the SIG-Events Working Group a long time ago. It feels like forever, Andrea, that I've been working with this group. But yeah, I've been kind of like this person that it's not in every meeting, but keeps coming back and saying, okay, we should build this POC. We should be looking into this kind of thing. So keep bothering the folks, trying to just build new cool stuff and hack around some cool projects. And that's me, and I think that's the main reason why we are here, because we think that there are a couple of things that we need to build with CDEvents, and there are things that we can do for other people to adopt CDEvents in a better way. So today, we are going to be talking about this very simple scenario, the idea of having a platform cluster that acts as a central platform for developers to go and request environments. This is something that it's becoming very, very common in the industry. Every company is building their own internal platform, and they all have platform teams in there just to build these platforms, right? So we wanted to take kind of this complex, this common scenario, and then just start looking into how people can use CDEvents to actually build the integrations between the different tools that they need in order to achieve this, right? So again, we are going to be using this setup where you, as a developer, go to a platform, and then you request an environment, and the platform should have all the configurations to go and create that environment for you. You can use at least 20 different tools to achieve that, right? But we will be showing a very specific combination today of tools that are coming from the CD Foundation and from the CNCF. If you are building platforms, you probably know about how it goes. It gets really complex really, really fast. So what do we want to achieve? We want to allow developers to provision their own environments on demand. And for this, we will be referencing this idea of having something that is called the platform cluster. Right? You can have more than one platform cluster, but we are making reference to this place where a bunch of tools are installed, and these tools will allow you to provision basically new Kubernetes clusters. We should be able to configure these environments in different ways depending what our developers are building. And for that, again, we will just need some kind of automation to make that happen. And of course, our developers will want to use those environments that were just created, so they need to have access to credentials and make sure that they have all the things that they need in order to connect and start working with these new provisioned environments. And then we need to make sure that we have clear extension points, because the moment that you tell a developer that you need to use this tool, they will want to use a different thing. So you will need to be able to extend your current solution to support like new use cases and new requests from your teams that will happen all the time. So in order to achieve that, what we need to do is basically we need to glue a bunch of different tools. And I didn't want to use the CNCF landscape, right? Like it's huge and it has tons of different things that are all amazing, but they actually were not designed to work together very well. They are all different in some way. They are taking different approach. They have been designed by different people trying to solve different problems. So we need a way to glue all these things in a way that we are not too tight and we are not, writing glue all the time. And I think that I'm referring to this here, like in this point where what I wanted to avoid, like as an engineer, is to build like a point-to-point integration, right? Like I don't want to integrate Tekton with this other thing. I want to make sure that Tekton can speak a common language, so this other tool can understand it. Right? So then, if you have like another tool like tool C that you want to integrate, you know that they are all talking the same language, and that's the main reason why we are presenting here in CDEvents, because we believe that the CDEvents vocabulary, it's going into the direction of being this common, dictionary of terms that we can use when we are talking about delivering software, or in this case, delivering environment or provisioning stuff. So we have been built a demo that it's basically using all these tools, and this is because we wanted to keep it simple, because this can go very, very crazy. I am working for this project that it's called Knative. How many people here knows what Knative is? Okay, we have some people that doesn't know, so I will just quickly explain what it is. So Knative has two big modules. One is Knative Serving, the other one is Knative Eventing. I think that in this particular talk, well, we are going to be showing both, in fact. Yes, okay. So Knative Serving, it's all about auto-scaling and basically providing some abstraction so developers can define how to deploy a service in a very simple way on top of Kubernetes. And then Knative Eventing, it's all about routing events between different systems. Because we are going to talk about CDEvents, we want to route events across different tools, so we will be using Knative Eventing routing capabilities to move stuff around. Tekton was introduced before, right, like by Viva as well, and I'm pretty sure that Andrea also talked about Tekton. But Tekton is pipelines, like running pipelines in a cloud-native way, right? Crossplane, how many people knows about Crossplane here? Okay, we have a bunch of folks that doesn't know. So Crossplane, basically what it does, it allows you to define how to provision infrastructure by creating Kubernetes resources. So what you can do with Crossplane is you can create a YAML file that basically represents a database in Google Cloud. So you can just write a simple YAML file with some parameters saying the size of the database, the type of the database. You send that to Kubernetes where Crossplane is installed, and then you will get a new instance of that database running in Google Cloud. And the powerful thing of Crossplane is that you can do exactly the same thing for AWS or for Azure. So in this way, you have like something where you can send Kubernetes resources, and it can provision different cloud resources in a very Kubernetes-oriented way. And that's, in my opinion, pretty powerful. Tools like Crossplane, they not compete, but they are kind of like in the same space of Terraform Cloud and Terraform in general, and Pulumi as well. So kind of like that infrastructure as a code kind of thing, but this takes it to the Kubernetes space. So if you're using tools like Tekton, where you define your pipelines using YAML, or Knative, where you define how to deploy a service using YAML, Crossplane can be easily integrated with any of these tools because, again, you can use all the same tools that you're using for all the other things. So today we are going to be showing how to create cloud resources using Crossplane, how to route events using Knative, and how to build software, and how to basically trigger different behaviors using Tekton. So when we talk about like the platform thing, like the box that I showed at the beginning, we are talking about this. Like it's a Kubernetes cluster that have Crossplane installed, it has Knative installed, it has Tekton installed, right? So whenever like we want to provision something, usually what we will do is we will basically trigger a pipeline that knows exactly which tools do we need to create and which resources we need to create in order to provision, our development environments. All the interactions and all the exchange of information, we want to do it with CDEvents because, again, we want to integrate all these tools without actually writing an integration between Tekton and Knative and Crossplane. Because the moment that we bring another tool into the picture, then we will just need to write another very custom integration. For the environment cluster side of things, we are going to using Knative, and in this case, it's Knative serving, right? And what we want to see here is that whenever we deploy a new service in this cluster that will be created dynamically in some way, we are going to be emitting some events saying that, that like a new service was deployed or a service was removed here, right? So if you think about this, when we interact with the platform cluster, I will be showing the flow now in a bit, but the idea is somebody will request an environment, the platform cluster will create a new environment, but then when the developer deploys a new service into that environment, we'll be also externalizing that using CDEvents, right? Then we can just build like a monitoring tool that just understands about CDEvents, and we can see what happens from the moment that somebody requested a cluster, like a new environment, to the moment that they deploy the service into that environment that was dynamically created. Why CDEvents and why that person there? I have no idea, but CDEvents, I know why. Again, we want visibility across all these tools and the behaviors that are being implemented, right? Like we want to see from a delivery point of view which tools are involved and the behaviors that they are executing and their responsibility. We want to implement an event-driven integration approach, and that's mostly because, again, we don't want to build these point-to-point integrations. And again, I believe that the CDEvents that we have in the vocabulary today are giving us kind of like the first version of this language that we need to expose, all the different stages in, delivering software, right? From creating environments to actually seeing kind of like services deployed. And as you can see here, these things are happening across multiple clusters, but we can have a common place where we can see all these events and route all these events so we can just actually understand that. And again, the nice thing about like using Knative and Knative eventing is that they already support cloud events, so CDEvents are supported out of the box in some way, right? We can send, CDEvents to Knative eventing, and these events are going to be routed, and then we can just pick them up and forward them to different services. So, as you can imagine, we are just going to be showing these two very big steps. First, how do we request an environment? And then basically how we use an environment, right? So kind of like from two different perspectives. The requesting an environment is like the developer is requesting an environment to the platform. The platform is going to be doing a bunch of stuff. The developer will get some kind of credentials to access the environment. And then, we are just going to be able to monitor that environment and see what's being deployed in there. I will show the flow now. Yeah. So the first thing that we are going to do, and again, we are doing this and showing all the diagrams kind of like step by step, like baby steps, because it gets complicated. And then when we see these like in different clusters and in the real infrastructure running, we can have kind of like, we can go back to the diagrams to say, okay, now we are doing this. This is what's happening, right? Again, we have a platform cluster which has Knative eventing installed, and it has a broker there that it's basically expecting events. It's receiving all the events. Then we have Tekton installed, and we have some pipelines configured there, and the pipelines will have the steps to basically use Crossplane to create and provision new environments. And even if this looks like really complex, at the end of the day, it's like if you look at Crossplane documentation, it's just creating some YAML files here, and here are some pipelines that are basically going to apply those YAML files using Crossplane, so new environments can be provisioned. As you can see, both like Tekton and Crossplane, we have like a CDEvents controller here. So it's like another component there that it's running alongside the main projects that basically understand CDEvents, understand how to produce and how to consume CDEvents to basically do something with the project, right? In this case, we are emitting an event here, like somebody requesting the new environment is emitting an event that the Tekton CDEvents controller can understand, and then just trigger that pipeline. When the cluster gets created, and when the cluster gets created, basically what's happening is that Crossplane is going to emit an internal event that can be captured by our CDEvents controller, and then we can emit another event to the broker. So in this case, the event that we are getting is like this cluster is ready to be used. So basically, we can just notify the platform cluster that what you requested is already ready, but maybe there is something else that we need to do when the cluster is ready. And the next step is basically installing some tools, right? In this case, in this cluster, we need Knative serving just to facilitate how the developer will build their services. And that's only happening because we know by Crossplane that the cluster is ready, so then we can go and trigger another pipeline that will install some tools in that cluster that was created. And in this case, as you can imagine, right, like we just created a new cluster, like a new Kubernetes cluster, and in order to install some tools, we need to do some credentials handling, right? Like we need to, first of all, get the credentials from this new cluster, just make sure that Tekton has those credentials so it can actually run some pipelines that will install some tools in here. All that interaction, it's pretty complex, but Tekton makes it easy to run pipelines, and Crossplane makes it easy to create resources and get credentials to access the resources that you created. This cluster, it's being created in GCP, in Google Cloud, and our platform cluster, like Ishan will show you now, is running in DigitalOcean. So the multi-cloud kind of like a strategy, it becomes more apparent, right? Like we are using open source projects to bootstrap clusters in different resources in different cloud providers, and then we are using events just to communicate this multi-cluster setup, and they can be running even in different clouds, and it all works, which is kind of like magic. It's really exciting. And finally, I guess that's the last step that we'll be showing a little bit of like the function side of things, is like we have now a new cluster as a developer, we got what we requested, and we are going to be deploying a new function into that cluster. And basically what we will be showing here is that as soon as I deploy a new function, we have another component there in that cluster that is, looking for Knative and all the things that are created and emitting CDEvents, like, a service was like, in this case, a function was deployed, right? That basically means that we can go back to the platform cluster and we can trigger some other pipelines to do some other things, like, for example, here, like run some production health checks here, right? Like, we want to verify that that function is running correctly, so we kind of like go and use it for a bit, or maybe just warm it up for our end users. So in this case, like we are just having automation again, even being triggered by like the environment cluster that we just created. And as you can see, for that we have another controller there that understands how to monitor, in this case Knative, and how to translate that into CDEvents and how to emit that. All this configuration and all the wiring is automated, and it's happening because we have full control on the things that we are creating, and and because we have the right controllers in the right places. So I think that Ishan now is going to show this flow exactly like in the cluster, and we will be analyzing like the different parts of this demo.
Good.
Go for it.
So to start with, this is our DigitalOcean cluster, which is the platform cluster, and I'll just go through the tools that we have on this cluster. So
you can definitely make it bigger.
Yeah. It's okay?
Can you make it bigger? Yeah.
Oh, okay.
There you go. Is that okay? Yes?
Yeah. All right. So we have the Crossplane system itself, Crossplane installed. We have Knative eventing installed on this, and Courier is also part of it. And next we have the Tekton itself deployed here, and I can show you the Tekton dashboard that we have. And we basically have one broker on Tekton, and I think I just need to port forward it again. Just a minute.
Auto access dashboard. Yeah. That's all right. Oh no.
It's port forwarded. Should work.
It is loading? Yeah. Are you connected to the internet? There you go.
Yeah. Tasks, and we have. Oh, it's not showing triggers. Anyways.
As you can imagine, like, there are tons of things going on there. So these can all fail, but that's the normal thing.
Yeah. So
it's there? Yeah.
It's showing here. So we have 3 different triggers for Tekton. One is for creating the cluster itself. The second one is for installing Knative on the newly provisioned cluster. And the third one would be that would notify once we deploy a Knative service on the provision cluster. That cluster is going to call us back and call us on this pipeline to print about some information about it, that it's ready. And so the way we start it is basically I'm going to trigger a cloud event to start with. So cluster. Okay, so we have received a cloud event. So in the task run, so we have this cloud event trigger a pipeline that is going to actually create two resources, and those two resources are basically a cluster and a node pool, and these are going to be created on GKE. And as you can see, Crossplane has now started provisioning these clusters, this cluster for us, and basically I can show you on the dashboard. Refresh.
There you go.
As we see, we have the workload cluster starting to get provisioned. And the next thing is, as you can see in the logs here, we have a CDEvents provider controller, which is basically a cross-plane controller, which we have integrated with CDEvents SDK. And it's managing this, or it's basically watching this cluster CRD that we just created in the platform. And it's waiting for it to turn ready. As soon as it turns ready, it's going to emit another cloud event that is going to get caught by one of our triggers, and it will trigger another pipeline. That pipeline is going to deploy Knative to the newly provisioned cluster. So it is going to take some time.
Yeah, as you can imagine, like creating a new cluster live, it's going to take like 5 minutes or so in GKE. Sometimes it takes a little bit longer, but hopefully.
We have used smaller machine sizes to help that.
Yes.
So, yeah, in the meantime, I can show. So we have one of the pipeline resources, that is the Git repo that is being used for this whole demo. And there we have the cluster and the node pool YAMLs that we are picking up from. And the tasks, as I've already showed you guys, that we have the first task which already has been triggered, and the next will be the install Knative, which should be automatically triggered by our Crossplane controller as soon as the cluster is ready. And once we have that, it is going to install basically the entire Knative serving and deploy our custom controller on that cluster.
Yes. Can you show the Crossplane resources? Because for people that doesn't know Crossplane, you know, like creating a Kubernetes cluster using a YAML file. Yeah. So not CRDs in this case are going to be resources, because the CRDs are the ones that define what the cluster is. In this case, you are going to be able to see what a cluster resource looks like. And again, in this case, it's like a GCP GKE cluster, but the EKS cluster for AWS should be pretty. It is pretty similar.
So we have like two things in the cluster. I can show you. One is the provider itself. It's a bit slow, the internet here. Maybe I'll just show it here. Yeah, so we have the provider GCP itself, which is the Google Cloud provider, very similar to how Terraform works, where you have the core Terraform and then you have a particular platform provider. In the same way, you have Crossplane core and then different providers for different clouds. So we have specified a provider GCP, and we have some configuration for that provider and the secret configs for our GCP account specified in one of the secrets. And the next thing is the cluster and the node pool that you see here. So the cluster is here, where you specify very basic things like the location, where you want to have logging and monitoring enabled. There are lots of other options as well. And another interesting place is that once the cluster is created, where Crossplane should write the cluster credentials to for the developers to use. So it's going to write it in a secret, which will be named the workload cluster creds and the default namespace. And another configuration option is the node pool itself, which kind of machines you want for this cluster, and like tons of other options. We have just kept it down to minimal. And yeah, that's.
So if you want to extend this demo, right, like to create clusters in AWS or in Azure, the only thing that you need to do to the platform cluster in this case is just to install the Azure or the AWS provider for Crossplane. Just configure the credentials, basically which accounts do you want to use to create resources, and then create like a couple of more YAMLs, like another cluster YAML or another node pool YAML for these providers, and it's pretty much the same, right?
Just add provider Azure and yeah. And you have
Where can I find source codes for that?
There,
Source codes for that.
we will be sharing some links.
yeah, it's on GitHub.
Yeah, it's
So
on GitHub. Yeah.
We'll share this like. Okay.
How is the cluster going?
Still provisioning.
It's not ready yet. Yeah. Well, the problem is that like when you use Kind, it's running locally, right? Like and creating kind of like a dynamic Kind cluster, it's messy, and you cannot use Crossplane, which is fun. But it's good because at the end of the day, you have like a real cluster that is ready for you to use, and then you can connect and install like real life tools. If you try to bootstrap like 2 clusters in your computer, you're basically dead. Yeah. Okay, so if you click there, you should be able to see the status, right? Like what is it doing? There you go. It's almost there.
It's almost there.
It's almost there. That's cool. So the next step that you're going to show now.
It's ready.
Okay, now it's ready.
I can show you the controller saying the cluster ready. That's our custom Crossplane controller with CDEvents integrated, and it says cloud event has been triggered. So it should have triggered our pipeline on the Tekton dashboard. So if I see the task runs, if I refresh this. Oh, 1 second, because I think I know why. We have a auxiliary config map to create a break. Kind of.
That's good.
So since I ran this. Just give it a couple more seconds, it should reconcile.
Yeah, that's good. Remember that at the end of the day, you shouldn't be like as a developer, you shouldn't have access to any of these things. Like this should all happen in the platform cluster. And I think that what we will show later on is like basically how we connect to this cluster without like knowing how it was provisioned. Reconciling? There you go.
Reconciled. Config map is updated, and there you go. So as you see, another pipeline was triggered by the controller with install Knative. Now there's a lot of steps there that it does, but basically at the end of the day, we should see Knative serving deployed up till here, and then we have our serving controller with CRDs for with integration with the Cloud Events SDK, and the last step would be installing the controller itself, and then next we can show probably a Knative service deployed and getting some feedback back again into Tekton.
That's the idea, right? But we still need to wait for those tools to get installed. And I think that what is important to share here, besides the fact that we're installing Knative, is that this is where you're going to configure your environments and define what your teams needs to have in their cluster, instead of giving them a plain cluster, so they need to install their tools, right? Here you can start building all that platform approach where you said, okay, for my teams that are doing these kind of things, we can just install a bunch of things for them, so they just can have them there and just use them. And usually the process of provisioning this is like 10 minutes, 8 minutes, and there you go, right?
So as you can see, we have Knative serving installed, and everything is ready for us. So probably now what we can do is like we can
So you
start.
can,
Yep.
I can take a look at that and
Yeah.
just do that.
Let me just get the credentials from here.
Yeah. So what Ishan is doing now is getting the credentials for the cluster that we just created, right? Like this cluster didn't exist 10 minutes ago. Now it does exist. So the developer should be able to connect to that cluster and now start building and deploying their services, right? Again, based on all the interactions between all these tools that we have used to create that environment and install Knative in it, we should be able to have like, a track record of all the cloud events that we have used and all the CD events that were used there. So as part of this demo, some of the events that we were like consuming from the CDEvents point of view was, like environment created, environment like ready and all these things. And then now we're going to go into the developer side where you can like deploy new services and then just see them as well in the same kind of like level of abstraction.
Okay, so right now we don't have any Knative services
Yeah.
installed. I'll just,
Yes.
no.
This one?
Yep.
Perfect. So basically what I'm going to do now is I'm going to use something that is called Knative functions just to create a very simple service, like a very small application, and I'm going to push it to this new cluster that we just created, right? And as Ishan said, like there is nothing running in that, in that cluster because we just installed, like we just created and we just installed some tools, but there is no application running. So Knative functions, basically what allows you to do is to create functions, like from the moment that you create like a small application to the moment that you deploy it, just using a CLI. So what I will create is like a CDEvents con function, and I'm just creating a directory. I'm going into the directory, and then I'm using this CLI tool that it's called func to create a new function project, right? Like, so I can basically create functions in any language that I want, and I use the CLI to just basically create the structure of the project. So if I use func create, and then I will just create a Go function here, just using language Go. You can use Java, you can use Rust, you can use Node.js. And I will just create a function that I can call using an HTTP request, right? So I've just created a function, and a function is a very simple project. Again, this is a very simple, very common Go project, and I can show you here how the function code looks like. In this case, it's just the template for a function that basically tells you, like, here's where you write your business logic, and it's actually just returning OK now, so let's change that. And I will just write something hello from CDEvents con, right? So that's kind of like a very simple function that every time that I call, I will just get that back. Func also is focused on the developer experience, right? Like the idea here is that if I just want to create this project and deploy this function, I don't actually need to build a container or write any YAML file against that cluster. So what I can do is I can do func deploy, and func will take care of building and containerizing this project for me and then deploying it to the the cluster that we just created. The only thing that it's asking me for here is like, is that all right?
Yeah.
There you go. Is that all right?
Yeah.
So the only thing that it's asking me here is like the Docker register, like the username in Docker Hub that I want to use to push the container to, and that's his username basically, because we have his credentials here in this computer. So what we will see here, like at the top here of the screen, is basically func CLI in this case. It's using a project that is called buildpacks to detect the language that we have used for creating our function, and it's going to start building that container for us. So it's just going to build a container. The next thing that it's going to do is going to push that container to Docker Hub. So then we can download that container into the cluster that we just created and just run it in there, right? So we will need to wait for a bit, right, until that gets built. I realized that this is something that is open in the community. Ishan here has like an Apple M1, which has a different architecture to build, containers. So, and the way that we are building these images, it's like it will need to cross-compile, right? Because in the cluster that we have here, that we have created, we don't have that kind of like cheaper architecture. So we need to create like an image in an M1 computer for, for like an AMD CPU in the other side. So it takes a little bit extra time on doing that. But that's kind of like something that it's been reported already, and we are working on making sure that that's fast. The whole process, the first time, it takes like around a minute or something, a minute and a half. Because of its M1, it might be a little bit better. But you can see here on the top, right? Something just pop up. And now we have a service running in our cluster that we just created. And
You have a URL?
I should have a URL. It's funny that the service is there, but this is still like not returning. But at the end of the command line tool, right, like that's still building and deploying stuff. Yes, there you go. Now we have a URL, which basically means that we can just interact with that function. And basically what I'm doing is I'm executing an HTTP request against that function. And
Do a double click.
yes, if I do a double click, it will copy.
Yeah.
Yes, sorry about that. There you go. So I'm just calling that function, and I've just called the function that I've just deployed. But that's not the last thing that we want to show. We want to show that because we deploy something, we can get notified.
As we have the service deployed and ready to be consumed, we had a Knative serving controller integrated with Cloud Events. And when we deployed this controller, we also told it through a config map that where can it send the Cloud event back reporting about successful deployments of Knative services. So that would be our platform controller, platform cluster. So that would be in Tekton dashboards. If I go back to task runs, it says display Knative service successfulay deployed. And if you see the message, it says default and the function name that we used. So default namespace and the service name, and was successfully deployed. And like it can have all kinds of metadata about the service and
and again, we are showing here that we can integrate things. We can get information back from the environment that we just created using this common language, these CDEvents, that basically are notifying that things were delivered in our environment. So then we can trigger pipelines to do any kind of runtime tests or performance tests against the stuff that are being delivered. One thing that is missing from this demo that I think that we can improve definitely for the next time that we do this presentation is to show you in a single place all the events that were emitted. So you can see from a delivery point of view what happened since the moment that we requested the cluster to the moment that this service was delivered. But I think that you can get the idea that at the end of the day, we will have full traceability across different environments about what were the things that were happening. Switch back to the presentation, right? Where is it? The other way?
yeah.
There you go. Yes. So we wanted to close the presentation, and we're almost out of time. So we will just go pretty fast. With some of the challenges that we faced when we were trying to build this demo. And I think that obviously like routing events across multiple clusters, it's a complicated thing. Doing that in a secure way, it's even more complicated with certificates and all these things because you need to provision all that infrastructure. It can be done, but we haven't gone through that yet. Another thing that it's really important for me to highlight in this presentation is that Ishan here built like 2 controllers, like one for Knative and one for Crossplane, which basically are doing this translation between the tool itself, Crossplane and Knative and CDEvents, right? And that's kind of like the way that we think that we should be integrating with other projects. For this demo, we also use the CDEvents integration from Tekton as well, which is really nice to have there because now pipelines can be, speaking the same language. We haven't showed, like Tekton integration in this demo, but we have the old POC that it's also using Tekton, and it's pretty nice. But when you look at this, it's like each project will have its own way of integrating and doing the translation with CDEvents. And each project will have a different way, even if this is all like Go. They all use different libraries. They all using different approaches. Like even, it's funny. Like he needed to build 2 controllers. They are completely different. Yeah. Like in nature. Like it's like, oh, what? And if you look at the Tekton integration, it's even more challenging because it's like 2 different components that you need to build. So I think that there is a lot of opportunity there just for project experts to just provide this integration out of the box. And I think that like this SIG event, we can just help them by building more SDKs and more tooling so they can build these integrations in a simple way. We know that the Java SDK is coming, and we are going to be working more on the Go SDK. So that's kind of like a lot of work that if you're interested in helping out, like building an SDK for cloud events, it's pretty cool. And it's not very kind of like advanced, but it's very important. We also kind of like have a couple of discussions there in the group when we were building this about emitting events. We are closing, yes. An emitting event. So I think that that's kind of like something that we need to keep tracking There are other tools. Check these tools if you're interested. Like Tekton is one of them. Gratix is another one, and Cartographer is another tool that you can use to implement the scenarios that we were showing today. There are some links in there. We will be probably tweeting about it and sharing with the organizers, so you can always check the links later on. And I think that that's pretty much it, man. Yeah. Thank you very much. That's my book. Ishan, thank you very much.